Reggie.
T, what's going on, T? Here we go again.
Back at it again. Informative, intriguing, thought-provoking, and exciting. 2 men and a stool.
And the stool represents 3 legs. Whenever one of those are weak, then we're bound to see more children fall through the cracks. The first leg is the home or the parents or guardians. The second leg is the school, where you're talking about the classroom or the administrative staff. And then the third leg, the student has to take some responsibility for their learning.
Here we are again. You know, we like to make sure we tell everybody that we want to always outline or highlight the good things that are going on around education and the stool, but we also want to make sure we talk about those things that are not going so well. So today is one of those shows that we're going to talk about some of those things that we consider not going so well. So when you look at the work and where we're going with this whole work around culture and climate and the impact and how do you make sure that all those things come together, we're going to talk about something today that, you know, normally black men or men don't talk about. We're going to talk about this thing called reading. One of the things that's near and dear to us, and just before we get into that, I got a call today from a good friend of ours that said, Tony, you and Reggie, I want you all to know I've looked at all 5 of y'all shows, and I want y'all to do one thing for me. Don't change a thing. I said, what did that mean? They said, I want you to keep it raw, keep it real, and keep it relevant. And you know, I pushed back, I said, tell me what that means. You say, keep it raw, keep it real, keep it relevant. I got the relevant part. They said, keep talking about stuff that makes sense. And we like the topics, like the things that you all talking about. We like the direction that y'all going with the show. Then they said, keep it raw. They said, don't hold back. Keep talking about those things and bringing up those points that people don't like to talk about. And then they said, keep it real. They said, don't y'all go trying to change yourself. Stay the same way you are, your delivery, the same thing. Don't slow it down, keep that same high energy. So I took that as a compliment. They took time to call us. I said, that's amazing that you called today to tell us that because we're actually doing another show today. So I'm going to take that back to Reggie and let them know what you said. I won't call the person's name out, but that's what they said.
Well, you know, Tony, for today, just for our audience, it's something that Tony mentioned, that black men. And we're going to give you some facts. And we used to talk about this word called an immediatist. And I equate being an immediatist to, we know that happened a number of years ago during slavery. Mm-hmm. But let's fast forward. When I think about this, I always talk about this, and I don't know if others consider the same, but what is emancipation without education? I changed that a little bit. In other words, if we can't read, no matter what shackles are off our community, and this focus is going to be on the black community, it's on our boys. And when we say that, and when you think about reading and its impact on culture and climate, we're still talking about the 3-legged stool, but its impact on culture and climate.
Right.
I'm going to turn it back over to you, Tony, but I just want to say this one point, and it's alarming. And it's alarming because if you're driving a car and the engine light comes on, then you get concerned that something is going on, something's going to break down. Well, the engine light is on our black boys and their reading, or their inability, or the illiteracy that's going on in our community. And I think we need to heighten it and take responsibility, especially those of us who have the ability to go out and do more as it relates to so many kids dropping out.
Well, listen, we're definitely going to highlight some of the things that are going on with black boys, but our sisters will be mad with us if we stayed right there. So we're going to talk about reading in general, but we're also going to separate the disparities amongst blacks when you're talking about just reading in general. So when you look at reading, and I go back all the way back, and I like going back to Beecher Hills Elementary School. I just found out doing the research, and I looked up phonics. And I looked at the process of phonics and what that was all about. Phonics is the way I learned to read. You know, you learn the letters, you learn all the sounds that the letters make, you learn how to group those letters together, and now you start formulating what we call words. And once you got words, you got sentences. And we learned that very early on. We learned our alphabets, we learned consonants, we learned our vowels, we learned our syllables. We learned all of those things at an early stage. So reading for us was not anything that was that took a long time. It was part of the process.
But when you say learning, Tony, you're not just talking about the ability to read words.
No,
you're talking about also comprehending.
No, but that's
understanding as well.
That starts.
That's what you're talking about.
Understanding, but starting the process.
That's right.
Being able to look at a word and break it down, even if it's a difficult word.
That's right.
You at least you have the ability to use your phonics to know, you got the S and the T, and you know what sound that makes. you got the T and the H, you know what sound that makes. But we're at a point right now where we're finding out a lot of our young people don't know the basics or the phonics of this whole thing. So we're looking at a vicious cycle. We're looking at a vicious cycle. We have a clip on our social media. And it's a dear friend of ours. Well, not a friend, but somebody we like to talk about a lot. Malcolm X talked about the fact that the disparities sometimes are based on where you are. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to break down that based on numbers and based on who we have teaching our kids, not so much who they are, but what energy they bring to the table. So when we talk about that reading, understanding what reading and comprehension is, not just calling words, if you can actually call the words, we want to move from that point on. So let's look at some data around this thing we call reading.
Well, first, I think we when we're talking about this subject, again, the lights are on.
Check in.
The check engine light is on.
Right.
Something is wrong. And I'll give you just an example, Tony. One critical example is in so many of our schools, we measure schools in terms of kids that are reading on or above grade level. And what we know, just in terms of the concern that the research is telling us, although it's grouped together, but it's also breaking out various demographics. And it's telling us that our kids are not reading on grade level. And we also know there are some other disparities there when we start thinking about if you can't read in this modern economy, unlike years and years ago where reading and being literate may not been as critical. It was still critical, but there were jobs out there. There was an industry out there. And so we ought to be alarmed. Beyond basketball, football, baseball, what other skills? Yeah, entertainment, but what else? We're talking about the civil rights equalizer is your ability to learn, your ability to read, your ability to go on and do great things in this education space.
When you look at, now that we're saying that we're not taking it serious, so now you have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that are not reading on level. And they're saying that if you're not reading on level by the time you turn 4th grade, there's a chance or a possibility that you won't graduate. 20% chance that you won't graduate. Well, make sure I get those numbers right.
You're right.
If you're not reading on grade level, you only have a 20% chance of graduating from high school.
Well, I think it's the other way around. I think they're saying that 20% of the students won't. Well, no, you're right. If 4th graders, I thought you meant as a whole.
Right.
That's right. Imagine if you keep going up that ladder, and the instructions continue to be more difficult, or we think about social promotion. How do we allow a child to go to the 12th grade that's reading on the 3rd grade reading level? And so I think for me and for us, I hope it causes the community to realize we must do something. You can't function in this world, in this society, without being able to read. Now, I know we're not doing a whole lot of laughing and joking like we normally do or smiling, but I don't see nothing to smile about, Tony. I want to smile, but I'm crying on the inside. Black men period, black women, women period, communities, family, we gotta do something about this. And we have some solutions. There are pockets out there that are talking about great things. The state of Georgia has this thing they're talking about, HB 538, reading on grade level by the 3rd grade. Great initiative, but now let's see where the meat is. Let's see what we're going to do about causing change. So I think I'll ask you that back. It's not rhetorical, Tony. Are we taking reading seriously?
Well, after we move from that, I think we've already agreed to the fact that no, we're not. But when you talk about at what point do we have a kid that's not able to catch up? Because when you look at early childhood programs, when you're concentrating and you're focusing in on just reading, how do we get more parents? How do we get that leg of the stool, the parent leg, that says, you know what, I've got to make sure that I'm sending this student to school by the 1st grade, the student that knows all of the alphabets, they know their alphabet sounds, they know their vowels, they know all these things that I talked about earlier when you talked about phonics, because if they don't get the basics,
that's right,
you can't catch up with that stuff. Because if I'm an 8th grader and you telling me I'm reading at a 1st grade level, I'm too ashamed to go back to take those remedial phonics classes, to learn all those things I should have learned when I was 2, 3, and 4 years old. But I have to humble myself to be able to do that, and hopefully the message will get out that it's going to be a thing around humbling yourself, and the student has to take some responsibility too. Even if you look at, I said 8th grader, but take a 10th grader. Because I've had conversations with some of our friends just as well that are working with a population of students that said that these kids can't read their name. These kids can't read the word the, is, may, cat, dog. So when you look at those things and you want to move around, what are the things we can do to try to rectify our situation with reading? And we're concentrating on black students because I think the disparities are greater amongst us.
And that's exactly why we're saying black students, because disparities are greater. When you compare black students compared to white students in terms of state exams or when you start looking at the data that NAEP puts out, you know there's a disparity. And so this is not Reggie and Tony saying this because we're not researchers by trade, but we can read and understand where the gaps are. And so we have to go, if I have a problem, I didn't say, when my engine light is on, I'm going to check my tires. I'm going to check my engine. So if we don't call it like we see it, then who else is? And so I just think when you talk about parents and you start thinking about, I always go back to the skill and the will. We gotta have parents. You may not have the technical ability to know the very scientific of reading, but your ability early on to work with your child to build resources while they're in the womb. We gotta start that early. But not only do we have to start it, it can't just be lip service. It has to be an actionable plan on what I need to do as a parent in my home to get my child ready to learn.
When you take this population of students that we just discussed in 8th graders, 9th graders, 10th graders, 5 years down the line, they still can't read. What's the job market? When you talk about what will they be doing? I mean, I like to make the statement, water boy today, what tomorrow? Because you can't build a career off being a water boy. And more than likely, I don't want to put a stigma or stigmatize those guys that are out there doing that, but I want to go back and say, I wish you could just take a data test to see how many of those young men are reading on grade level. And then what are their plans for the future? Because if you can't read, they're not making a job market for a non-reader in the United States.
No.
There's nowhere in the world that they're actually making a job market. So what's the impact on not just the job market, but functionality for a young person?
Well, it's not just only functionality. When you go and look at the statistics of those that are incarcerated, quite a few of young boys in the juvenile justice system and men who are incarcerated are illiterate. I want to say that again, are illiterate. And if you live in a society that's called capitalism, and that is the ability to go out and acquire, or in this case, I won't use that particular definition of capitalism, but when you think about capitalism and being aware, and you think about resources, or if you think about the ability to go out and get a job, or if you think about the ability to go out and earn a livable wage, but more importantly, how do I bring myself to a middle class situation, then from a middle class situation to being wealthy, or the 1% or the 10%? Because capitalism is about money. Capitalism is a focus around money. I can't earn a living in this society, in this job market, if I don't have the skill set, the prerequisite skill set. If I can't read, what jobs are out there right now? You can't tell me factory jobs out there, because in factory jobs, you have to have the ability to know how to read. What jobs are out there for you to function if you can't read? You're going to find a way. So we're talking about crime rates increasing. We already talked about dropout rates. Every young man is not going to become a professional athlete or an entertainer.
So back to the point you made earlier about literacy rates in prison. So those same literacy rates are impacting suspension rates in schools, in-school suspension.
Let's go up the ladder,
expulsion. just from the
go up the ladder.
When you talk about the impact reading has on culture and climate, it actually does impact dropout, expulsions, suspension, in-school suspension,
the job market,
above, attendance.
Okay, I'll give you a prime example. Look at this. I know
you're going to go job crime, but let's stay inside the classroom.
No, I'm going inside the classroom. Okay. We talk K through 12.
Right.
Let's even go through, if you start looking at it, you start looking at the number of kids who are not coming to school ready to learn. By kindergarten, pre-K. If you haven't worked with your child, then you go up that ladder. That child is already behind. And now you're starting to take classes, you're starting to read, you're in the kindergarten, the first, second, and third grade. And now you start to get measured by your ability. We start testing. And then we're saying by the fourth grade, if you 20% of our kids, if they're not reading by the 4th grade, will probably not graduate from high school. And it used to be retention. If you retain one time, there's a 27% chance you won't graduate from high school. Twice, 54%. If you retain 3 times, 100%. So what does that tell you? Social promotion. How does that help that child read? We got to intervene early. And so if you go on that ladder, high school, now you're taking high school classes. You're not even taking college level classes, whether you're going to a 2-year, 4-year, or the military, or if you go to some trade. You still have to learn to read. So how does that make me marketable? It doesn't. Even if I start looking at our colleges. In 1976, only 38% of black males were enrolled at our HBCUs. Now, 48 years later, we're hovering around 24, 25%. So when we start thinking about it in this short podcast, we're not going to solve the problem. What we are going to do, every once in a while, we're going to bring up this problem around reading. Because how can I function if I can't read? How can I get a job if I can't read? How can I take care of my family if I can't read? Decreasing the prison rate, recidivism. I gotta survive. Sometimes good people do bad things. And so it's crime rate and these other things. I'm going to take from you. I'm going to find a way to survive if I don't start thinking about it. And so I guess for me, as I turn it back over to you and began to close out on this particular podcast, I'm concerned. I think we're losing the battle. Now, we haven't lost the war because there's still hope. But hope without opportunity, thus emancipation without education, you're still not free. You're not free to go participate in this society, in capitalism, all the wonderful things that you want to acquire or have for you and your family.
So when you think about this whole thing, when you're looking at reading and its impact on self-esteem, when you talk about reading and its impact on confidence, just not being able to read the label of, we always talk about healthy eating and being able to figure out what you're eating and not being able to pick up a label and be able to read the things that are in the package, in a pack of hot, what they call them, red hot Cheetos. And I'm not putting anything on the spot, and I know I shouldn't have called them out, but when you don't know the chemicals that you're putting in your body because you can't actually read the label, reading impacts all aspects of your life. When you're talking about whether it's reading a label, whether it's knowing whether or not to go in as opposed to go out. Sometimes you may see a sign that says no trespassing. If you don't know what that means, you move forward and you're in a situation. So reading has to be a part of what goes on in a kid's life.
When we think about some of the entertainers or we think about the athletes, the one thing I can tell you is that there's no doubt in my mind when I think about reading, some of our great athletes, they're able to read their contracts. They're businessmen. When I think about the LeBrons, the Stephs of the world, the Magic Johnsons of the world, or even when I think about rappers of the Jay-Z's of the world, when I think about those entertainers, I can guarantee you they can read. Yes, their talent may have gotten them in that door, but to stay in the door and protect the resources and what they're surrounding themselves with smart people. And so when I start thinking about the Lil Waynes, the Drakes, and I start thinking about R&B singers of today versus yesterday, so many of the people back in the day got taken advantage of. But when we start thinking about our kids, the great equalizer being education. So I understand why some podcasts get excitement from entertainment. But let me ask you, Tony, why isn't the subjects and the topics that we're talking about, why isn't it catching fire?
I'll liken it to the fact that, we had a session earlier this week where we went to the library. The two of you and I, we go to coffee shop. We like to go to quiet places. And it was 5 o'clock in the evening, and the library was empty. I bet if we'd have took a few minutes and drove down the street to the basketball court, there were young men on that court playing. So they were honing in on that basketball craft like they should be honing in on their brain. And what they're doing is overemphasizing, because the me I see is the me I'll be. They see the athletes, they see the entertainers, they see the rappers, and they see all this stuff on social media. They don't see the successful businessmen that are talking and walking and acting like they got good sense. They don't see all of these young men that are actually owning their own business. So the me I see is the me I be. So when you talk about honing your craft and being in a zone where you know what you're doing, first you got to identify what that is. And once you know what your specialty is, and you know that requires some level of reading, an intense level of reading, as opposed to spending that same time on the basketball court, because that's recreation. Recreation, you can get that as long as you live. But this is what we call creation, where you're putting your life together, and now you're understanding that it's not homework, it's self-work.
Right.
If I send something home for you to do, that's not homework. You'll do it at home. But who you're doing it for? You're not doing it for the teacher. You're not doing it for the principal. You're not doing it for your parents. Who you doing it for, Red? You're doing it for yourself. Parents, we got to take control of this social media. And the only reason I say that, because I've been caught in, I've sat for hours going through reels. And as an adult, I know better. And when I'm telling myself to get off, I won't stop. So knowing what that does to a child, that same time that they're spending just going through shorts and reels, of course, that's what we want them to do, because that's what we are. But we really don't want them to do it as a kid if they can't read. They'll listen to those stories all day because it's very captivating. And it runs the algorithms through their minds, and they know what to send them after they watch a certain video long enough. So parents, you gotta control this thing we call social media time and figure out a way to do that. And that's my last word. I know we can go on and on.
Yeah, we could. Our next podcast is going to be really surreal. But right after that, we're going to have more podcasts on families and parents. The parents' role in this three-legged stool is coming. People have been asking about it, but it's coming up in the next couple of podcasts. Thank you.